Redditors who witnessed a murder, what is your story? Saw a guy push his passenger, an old man, out of a car. IHE car was skryaking speeding round a corner, the door flings open and the driver very clearly pushed the old man out. Not the greatest thing for a 10-year-old to witness. The even weirder thing was that as IL stood there in shock while the old man was completely still in the road, a weird man walking past me chuckled and said, "It wasn't you, was it?" Then chuckled again. It hasn't affected my life, but think about it every now and then. I didn't actually witness the murder-suicide, but I saw the direct aftermath seconds later. I was 6 years old at my babysitter's house after school. The husband came home drunk and demanded he speak with her in the backyard. A little bit afterwards their dog is freaking out demanding it come inside. I went out back and the dog lead me to them. The husband shot my babysitter and then himself. She was gone, but he still had labored breathing before dying in front of me. It's still one of my most vivid memories 21 years later. When I was 10, my uncle murdered my mommy's boyfriend at our house. It wasn't in the house, but he chased him through our house and killed him outside in front of the house. It really destroyed a part of our family as well as relationship between my mom and grandmother. It was 30 years ago and I am only one alive besides my uncle that was there that night. I wanted to thank everyone for the kind words and the questions. Kinda therapeutic to talk about. At a pub about 2 years ago. Large group out the front arguing, then a guy got blindsided and punched in the side of the head. The guy that hit him sprinted off into the darkness. The guy went down and never got up. His wife watched it happen and was trying to get him to wake up while the fighting and arguing continued. 30 minutes go by and he guy hasn't moved since being punched. Bar staff have been doing CPR on him for about 15 minutes before emergency services finale arrive and continue. Turns out he was brain dead on impact. They kept him alive somehow until the morning but turned life support off the following afternoon. The guy was 46, at his local bar and got killed. Heaps shit thing to see, I'll never forget that night. The guy that hit him was 19, got charged with murder and is in jail as we speak. When my dad first moved to North Hollywood in the 80s, he woke up one morning to some guy getting beaten by 3 guys, one with a baseball bat, across the street from his apartment. Police were called but the kid ended up dying on the scene and my dad watched it all from his bedroom window. I don't remember if he ever learned any more details. Welcome to the neighborhood. This was when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, so late 80s. My friend's mom had picked us up from school in her station wagon and I was in the way back. There were probably 6 or 7 of us kids in the car and we were stopped at a traffic light across from a homeless shelter, about to get onto the interstate. This guy is walking down the street with an armful of chewing tobacco and drops a pack. A homeless guy leaning up against the wall picked it up. There was an angry exchange in which the guy refused to give back the tobacco, so the other guy kicked him and stomped him to death on the sidewalk. Was walking home one day and saw a couple arguing. The dude started walking off away from the girlfriend's car, and apparently she was not happy with that. She proceeded to get in the car and wait about 5 minutes till he was way off down the sidewalk. I was walking on the opposite side of the road as him and all of a sudden I'll see a blur and he goes flying like a rocket. She must have been going at least 60 miles per hour. He flew through the air and hit a tree. Died instantly. The women then screamed out the window at his body and drives away. There was blood smeared all over the crumpled hood and I'll never forget the sight of his contorted body at the base of the tree. Almost folded in half. I had to talk to the police and within the hour they caught her at a car wash, trying to clean the blood and chunks off the hood and grill of her car. I was 16 at the time. For those of you concerned, thank you. Elle actually did have to see a therapist for a few months after. I am doing very well right now. However, I don't think I'll ever fully get over it. It's one of those things that always sticks with you. A drunk man was pushed down some stairs by the bouncer. Unfortunately, the drunk man was unable to catch himself and instead spun around and landed on the pavement with the back of his head making first contact. He was alive for a little while but quickly succumbed to his wound and arrested on the pavement. He was declared dead 15 minutes later in Ed after being transported by ambulance. There was no CCTV or clear evidence of malicious intent that would hold up in court, and the man was known as a drunk and had no friends or family. It was ruled an accidental death. I had to walk past that spot most days going to work and will never forget his face, the look of mystified horror followed by the glassy-eyed slack-jawed expression that come with death. I was the medic that transported the man. I was by his side from start till the declaration. One of the most visceral experiences of my career thus far. I was 16, driving down the highway in the passenger seat of my mom's car. About 3:30 p.m. traffic came to a complete halt and we were in the right-hand lane. So as we're creeping along, a semi-truck appears on the shoulder of the highway, door swung wide open. As we move past, there is a trail of blood down the doorstep onto the concrete and then leading about 20 feet further down the road. As we crept further, the trail of blood ended with a man lying face up completely covered in blood. There were no police or ambulances there yet. This was on a highway in the suburbs of a major metropolitan area in the US, so plenty of people saw before the scene was taken hold of by emergency services. Turns out the truck driver had a partner with him. They got into an argument and the passenger stabbed the driver like a dozen times and then escaped. The murderer was caught about an hour and a half away, one state over, 2 days later. I have to imagine that I was about 5 minutes behind the truck pulling over because the police can be in that spot in about 30 seconds. Being in the passenger seat in the right lane of the highway, I was about 10 feet from the body. Haunting image. Saw my neighbor murdered in cold blood in my own driveway. My neighbor was helping his lady friend escape a very abusive relationship. Lady's ex hunted her down like a dog. Saw my neighbor walking back home with her after they went to get food for his kids. Heard 3 loud pops. I ran outside to find her screaming and him blown out of his shoes and into my driveway. He had a hole in his chest big enough to put my fist in. There was nothing I could do to save him except sit with him and hold his hand while I prayed for him to pass quickly. I'll never forget that night. 48 hours later I broke the lease on my house and moved in with my boyfriend who lives in a much safer borough. You were an awesome neighbor and a wonderful father, Kane. You're certainly missed. Obviously a lot of lead up to the story, but I'm not going there. My girlfriend was taking her dog for a walk while I got showered for work. I'm in the bathroom when I hear voices coming from outside. I look out the window and to my horror there is my girlfriend talking to her abusive stepfather, who is standing about 5 away from her. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but Lee knew it wasn't good. Stepfather raises his shotgun, shoots my girlfriend in the face, then shoves shotgun under his chin and pulls the trigger. Murder-suicide. Life's never been the same for me since. Lots of messages, so I wanted to say this. Thank you all for the support. It was 20 years ago and though I'll never get over it, I can live with it. It took nearly 2 years before I came to realize there was nothing I could have done to stop it. I will never forgive her family for knowing what that man was doing to her and they did nothing about it. I'm not really good with words, but I wanted to thank everyone for the kindness and support. So, I live in a country where it's pretty normal for public buses to steal each other's routes/schedule/whatever. When I was 8, I was in one of them buses. I guess my driver was the one acting wrongfully. Along comes another bus. This is early in the morning, both buses are full. I was going to school, 2nd grade. The driver of the other bus stops my bus, both drivers get off to yell at each other. The second driver has a gun but he is older/more feeble, so my driver grabs the gun and shoots him once. I saw everything as I was sitting by a window. When the body falls and I see the red stain, the world goes quiet for me. The last thing I heard was the soft gunshot, .22 caliber maybe. I get off the bus and walk to school, 20 to 25 blocks away. Didn't remember a single thing about it. When I got to school I was pale and wouldn't react when spoken to. Eventually, I came to and was able to speak normally and matter-of-factly. Can't stand the noise of fireworks since. Fun fact, my now husband was in the other bus and also witnessed everything. I was around 8 to 9 years old and we were in a vacation village. While we were doing checkout with my family, my father was at the desk while we were waiting at the lobby couches. An argument broke out between 2 guys who were at the lobby bar. I actually don't know what it was about, because it was in another language. One of the guys grabbed a bottle, smashed it, and attacked the other one, hit him in the neck. That guy fell on the floor, and there were blood all over the place. My mother closed my eyes after that, and took us out while other people get involved. Years later I've learned that guy lost his life. I live in Syria and I've been forced to leave my house due to ISIS attacks on our city. My family and I lived for 2 days under light artillery between ISIS soldiers and regime-affiliated troops that lived in the neighborhood. As I looked through the window I saw an ISIS soldier running with a rocket launcher screaming. Then there was a hole in the building in front of him and the 3 men inside were blown to pieces. He quickly got shot in the chest and laid on the ground, dead. Oddly enough, and lucky for me, this incident didn't make a permanent damage on my well-being. I speak of it with the family sometimes to remember how we miraculously managed to survive. In the parking lot of a strip mall in Washington state, a guy walked into a jewelry store and did an armed robbery. Plainclothes security guard waited until the robber exited and shot the robber in the back. I was in a car and I didn't hear the shot, but I did see him fall and some shoppers gathering around his body. We drove by slowly to see if help was needed. When I saw how fast the pool of blood was spreading, I pretty much knew he would not survive. Worked in a pub when I was younger. Walking round cleaning tables and emptying ashtrays. Back in the days you could smoke indoors. And a couple of guys are standing at a high table talking. Another guy comes in and starts shouting with one of the group, getting a bit heated, so I go over to ask them to calm it down and remove all empty glasses and bottles from the area. As I'm talking to them, the lone guy lunges with a knife, misses me but goes in the chest of the other. He moves into a bear hug with the guy he just stabbed and continues to stab him a further 14 times in the back before running out the building. Spent what seemed like hours putting pressure on the stab wounds, waiting for an ambulance, but the guy was dead before they got there. Police caught the guy. I gave a statement and spent a few days in court giving evidence and helping get the guy jailed. Not something I ever want to experience again, as it fucked me up for quite some time. I saw my cousin murdered when I was a kid. We were back in my hometown. He was sitting in his car in front of my aunt's house and he was gunned down. I was on the porch with his siblings. It was random, but he didn't live the most righteous life, so we honestly never know the motive and they never found out who did it. When I was 6, my family went to see Sesame Street on Ice downtown. When we were leaving, a little girl my age was struck by a van and dragged across the parking lot. I remember the mother jumping on the windshield screaming at the driver while the van was still moving. My mom was a nurse and was helping until the ambulance arrived, but she was already dead. I can still remember the screams and lifeless body of that little girl. This was over 30 years ago. Was going to work one day when a van hit a cyclist. Saw the person fly through the air, looked like a mannequin. I kept talking to the body, but, with blood coming from his ears, I knew he was dead. Unfortunately, they never released the name of the victim. I would have liked to have visited the grave. Some of the other witnesses were messed up, but I was, and still am, okay with it. I read that one's hearing is the last thing to go. If I am ever in that bad situation again, I will talk more conversationally. Used to work at a movie theater. I would change the sign near the road in the middle of the night. I saw a taxi pull up to the bus stop. It stayed there for quite some time. That's what caught my attention, was how long it was there for. Saw a dude get out and quickly walk away. A week later I was changing the sign again and I hear a voice below asking me to come down. After he showed me his badge I obliged and he asked if I had seen anything weird the week before. I replied only that a taxi had sat there for a while and a guy got out. I had to then go look at lots of mugshots. Turns out I was the sole witness to some poor bastard's murder without even realizing it. Wish I had a better look at the guy so I could get him some justice. I saw a few in Mexico. The most memorable one was the first one I saw while I lived there. I was cleaning out a house with some buddies of mine. A guy was walking down the block. We heard gunshots. I looked out the window and there was that same guy laying out on the sidewalk. A black pickup truck sped by. I think there were 4 guys on back. All with bandanas covering their faces, all with guns in their hands. The thing that stuck with me is they all looked younger than me. I was 22 at the time. According to the paper that was released right after he was from out of town, and likely they mistook him as someone else, he was 17. His blood was left on the streets for days. One of my friends said he heard 14 shots, but I only heard 6. I have the whole experience written down as it was so foreign to me. This was in Altamirano. I used to stay up late at night trying to think of what kind of life would lead those guys to do a drive-by like that. I also wonder about that 17-year-old, I'm sure he had family visiting there. Was at a bar, couple guys got into an argument. The whole thing subsides, then a few hours later one of them leaves. As the guy is leaving, the other guy he was arguing with earlier runs outside and punches him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Only other time I've seen someone die was on the highway, not murder here. Guy jumped off a bridge I was driving under, had a rope tied off and hanged himself. Got smashed by a truck before he died though, caused a really big mess. Hell, maybe the rope broke his neck before getting plowed into. Idk. Was in an Islamic State suicide attack. 78 fatalities, 500 wounded. The screaming is something that will be with me forever. When I was a kid I witnessed a hit and run. An SUV ran into a pedestrian and sped away. I don't think they ever caught the person. The poor girl they hit flew into the air, the SUV passed underneath her, she landed on the road and she died. It was heartbreaking. She couldn't have been over 25 years old. Granted, this wasn't murder, but I just couldn't believe there was a person there 1 second and then gone the next. It always made me wonder how people could live with themselves after doing that. Then LD wonder how many people knew would do the same thing. Eventually I wondered if I was capable of doing something like that. To0. All it's made me realize is hypotheticals are dumb because we really never are who we think we are. I also appreciate every year I get older. 5 years ago. There was an attempted home invasion at my house when I was 18. I was downstairs watching Top Gear when I hear somebody trying to break in the door. My father, military type, very protective, confronted the guy and the guy turned around and shot my dad in the chest with a sawed-off shotgun. My dad was able to fire off a couple shots afterwards, killing him. But my father already was on the ground dead. This is the very short version. First time writing this out. Still surreal to think about. Turned out the guy was a felon with 6 butcher knives down his pants. Presumably trying to find some reason to hurt someone. I consider my father a hero. Most people considered his actions stupid or irresponsible, local internet commenters, but you had to know him to understand his mentality. If you want the full detailed story and my recovery, or if you're struggling with PTSD, PM me. Pop pop pop. Fireworks on Halloween? That's weird, but whatever. Pop pop pop. Oh. It's someone dead in a car. I should call 911. For me, the surprising thing was just how anticlimactic the experience was. It was just surreal. I don't know if they ever caught the guy, but it was a drug-related murder. The murderer was in the car with him, so it was probably someone the victim trusted. Saw my friend get shot in the head and died a few minutes later during a crossfire between her oldest brother and the police. Was very heartbreaking. I still miss her 22 years later. We were playing on a field next to her house and her brother was watching us. He pulled a gun out, started shooting as soon as he saw the police. I didn't think this would get a lot of attention. Thank you for all the awards and all the happy cake days, for the ones who posted on here. For some reason I cannot see them on the post. But thank you. Sorry if I have not replied to everyone. In the 1980s, I was touring the ship Queen Mary, which was permanently docked at Long Beach, CA. They were hosting a motorcycle show on board that day, and the idiots had hired the Hells Angels as security. Open staircases were attached to the ship on the outside, allowing one to climb from the pavement level to entryways at any level of the ship. I was standing on the lowest landing of the staircase, about 10 feet above ground, when the rival Mongols motorcycle club showed up. Of course a brawl broke out, immediately below me, with knives, fists, and chains. I saw a Mongol stab a Hells Angel in the back just as a string of police cars were coming over the causeway to break it up. I read in the paper that night that the Hells Angel had been stabbed in the kidney and had died. Surprisingly, it was the only fatality of the brawl. The first day I moved to the town I grew up in, 3 years old, I went to Burger King and saw two men get into an argument while I was in line, having to do with a gang rivalry I believe, and it escalated to the point where one of the men pulled out a gun, and within another minute or two it had been fired off and the other guy was on the ground bleeding out. My mom told me to look away, but that's the most impactful few peeks I've ever snuck, and those few images will always stick with me. I was in Terminal 2 in Barcelona Airport the morning of March 24, 2015. There were only 3 flights leaving the terminal, and we were all delayed due to fog. 150 people boarded Germanwings Flight 9525, 30 minutes before we boarded our flight. Although I didn't see it happen, we were the last people to see them alive. The first officer crashed the plane into the French Alps, killing himself and murdering the other 149 people on board. It will haunt me for the rest of my life. Me and my friends were on the bus. When the door opened, a guy ran in and pulled someone off the bus by his hair. Once outside, with one smooth and clean motion, slit his neck. It seemed like a professional hit, but I don't know for sure. We rushed to help him, but he died within seconds. Another time I was in Guatemala and there was a guy in a motorcycle in front of us. Another car pulled up next to him and ran him off the road. We saw him get launched off the road onto the rocks. My brother-in-law went to get help him. When he came back, his clothes were covered in blood and said nothing. He talked to the police and EMTs, and the rest of our car ride was silent. The final time I was asleep. It was about 3 a.m. and I heard shouting and footsteps. I went outside to check on it. It was really loud, so my next door neighbor also heard it. He works at the ER. When I got there, he was helping a man who had been stabbed several times around the abdomen. I called 911 and applied pressure to one of the stab wounds. When the EMTs arrived and took them away, I asked my neighbor if we saved that guy's life. He told me that nothing was for sure, but that he didn't think that guy was going to make it. When I was around 12, my friend and I were tossing a football back and forth in the street. His parents were having one of their screaming matches when his mother burst out of the screen door. She made it about halfway across the street before there was the boom of a shotgun and down she went. I was standing at a crosswalk. The guy next to me started walking. It was pre-dawn, and without looking, so did I. The guy behind me grabbed my collar and yanked me back to the sidewalk. I spun around, pissed off. The guy in front of me got hit by a car speeding through the intersection. I freaked out and called 911, but the guy died before the ambulance got there. The guy that pulled me back was gone. White guy, sunglasses, tan coat. Guy that got hit was fit as hell, wearing a gray windbreaker. So I don't know what the legality is. Maybe it's considered manslaughter, or I don't know. That's what lawyers are for. I see this happen more than LD like to admit. I work for a company that puts cameras on utility trucks, mostly garbage trucks. So what will happen is, there will be like a 2-lane road and the helper on the back will attempt to cross to road to grab a bin, and either a car coming the other direction will hit him, or even worse, a car from behind the truck will attempt to pass and hit him. Saw this twice last month. Bus in Poland with big side mirrors, went up on the curb a bit when attempting to pull into the bus stop lay-by at the tram station. Mirror took out a guy waiting for the bus. Slammed him in the head and killed him right there. Bus driver tried to drive away, bus passengers tried to stop him, bus ran over someone rude, but I don't know if they died too. Our tram had already started moving and left the station. We all dialed 112, and apparently police and ambulances got there pretty fast. I don't know what happened to the bus driver. I used to live in a real bad neighborhood that had a lot of drugs and gang violence. I swear that street had been shut down due to drug lab raids at least twice a year. There was a drug dealer who lived across the street and had a really nice green Dodge Charger that I loved. One night, I guess a drug deal went wrong, and I heard a lot of yelling, so I look out the window and I see the car up in flames. A few days as I'm getting home, I see the same guy running down the street as 3 to 4 guys are chasing him with. One of the guys caught up to him and beat him to death with a baseball bat. We moved out within the year. Welp, I was smoking a blunt on my friend's back porch one night when we heard a massive boom. Down the road, an Audi full of joyriding kids had slammed into a family's minivan as they pulled out of a 7-Eleven. The kids in the Audi were fine, despite blitzing down the road at about 60, and scattered immediately after the wreck. The driver of the van died there on the spot, and a little girl bled out before the EMTs could save her. Her screams grew fainter and fainter until they stopped. I'm calling it a murder 'cause those inconsiderate assholes took human lives through callousness and fled like cowards. All the dozen or so murders I've seen in person have been when I'm visiting my hometown in Mexico. They've all more or less panned out the same from what saw. Some bickering which lead to someone pulling out a knife or gun and killing the other person. And all of these occurred in fairly crowded areas. Later that week I would find out it was organized crime related. Whoever got done in was in hostile territory or under suspicion of messing around on their turf or members. P.S. If asked what did you see, just reply with, I didn't see shit. I don't know what you're talking about. Has worked for me on more than one occasion. It's not exactly murder, maybe, I guess you can decide. I'll try to make it a fast one. I was a medic in Afghanistan. A few people got injured in an IED blast, one of which was a kid, around 14 to 15 years old. We had limited resources, so sometimes you can only save a certain number of people, those who are most likely to be saved, the immediate casualties come first, and sometimes you have to let the others who are too far gone just kinda sit there, I guess. You make them comfortable and talk to them, but there's not much you can do. Anywho, the reason I equate it to murder is, when we saw what we had in numbers, we realized we could save one, a guy that had lost quite a bit in the blast, and there wasn't much we could do for the kid. So I gave him some pain meds, to help him relax, and help him sleep. And he did, he went to sleep and never got to wake up. It was a murder in the grand scheme depending on your viewpoint, but truly felt like I was the one dealing the final blow, even if it was for mercy. He was a local, I never got to learn his name, or anything about him apart from the short time I spent with him before working on the other casualties. I was in my car, at a traffic light. Guy crossing the street recognized the driver of car on my 90 degrees right. Takes out the gun and shoots him though the front window. Driver manages to exit the car, stumbles to the middle of traffic crossing, drops and dies. Found out later in the news driver was the new boyfriend of killer's former GF. Seeing a dude die like this fucked with my head for few weeks at least. 2011 Leavenworth, KS. I was in the military at the time, and a few of us decided to go off post to bullshit around the local Walmart. On the way back, we were driving when we heard shots. Having the training we had, we immediately knew it was a firearm, and not some fireworks or whatever. Turned to look, and there was a man running around cars in a barbershop parking lot, trying to evade gunfire. Needless to say, he didn't make it. A few months later, I got out. Went home. About a year later, the Leavenworth County prosecutor called, said I had to go back and testify. Felt like I was being watched the whole time I was in town. Haven't been back since. I've done horrible things, and seen horrible things. But one of the worst is the sound of the victim's mother screaming in court as I described her son's death to a judge. Fucking rough. As a child, I saw a beheading. As a child, I also saw a man shoot a bazooka at a bus full of people. Think Southeast Asia and how overloaded the buses there are. Direct hit. My neighborhood is pretty wild, so there are probably even better stories, but the one I remember is this. It was about 5 years ago. This gang leader man, he was a big deal, mafia connections and stuff, had just got released from prison. I don't know much about the backstory, but he had some dirt with a nightclub owner that happened to be my neighbor. The gang attacked the nightclub that night, tables were thrown off windows, fire alarm went on, and we obviously heard gunshots back to back. Me and my dad rushed to the balcony, very dumb of us, and we saw this naked guy with only a towel around his waist who was walking out of hammam. Hammam is like a public bath. I'm Turkish, it's common here. The man ran to the nightclub IG. He was just curious, and then boom, I saw the exact moment he got shot from his chest. We later found out he was the only one who died that night. Nobody inside the nightclub was harmed. I had the opportunity to support NATO activities within Kosovo. There was an internal struggle going on and I was given specific instructions not to interfere with local life, and not to deploy a weapon unless fired on. We weren't supposed to allow our presence to be noticed. The team I was assigned hooked up with NATO people and we were being escorted to the location they wanted us. En route, we went through a market and there was a solider with gun who was yelling at this woman and child. I don't know what was being said, I don't speak the language. The solider opened fired and killed the woman, the child, and a few others. We took cover and waited for him to leave. I was told he was KLA and the KLA were ethnic cleansing Serbians. Within days the US Navy was launching Tomahawk strikes at the area. Was driving with my sister coming home from a wedding reception. She slows the car down and says there is a body in the road. So she parks her car to block any cars from hitting the body. We get out of the car and a young woman is laying in a pool of blood, choking on her own blood. Her leg looked like a spaghetti noodle. I heard her gurgle of death, it was awful. Her abusive boyfriend who chased her out of a bar into oncoming traffic came back and sat with her and kept putting his hands in the blood, screaming and crying. The car who hit her kept driving. I guess technically not a murder, but she was scared and running from abuse and was killed by a hit and run. I remember looking for her story in the news. Her name was Melody and she had very young children. Southern France, Corsica, in the late 1990s. I was in a bar with my girlfriend at the time having a drink. We were inside but there were also tables outside in the narrow medieval alley. Suddenly, 2 gunshots ring out. Unlike elsewhere in Europe, guns are not that unusual in Corsica, so people take cover and dive under tables, music stops and such, but there is no huge drama. People are kind of used to this kind of stuff. I look at the barman, he shrugs. I head for the door to see what is going on and step out into the alley. In front of me lies a guy, no more than 20 years old. He is in fetal position, very peaceful looking, but he is clearly dead. His brains are all over the wall. All tables are empty, also in the restaurant across the alley. More and more people come out of the bar. We all look at the dead guy. There is a clear sense of let's get out of here. I find my girlfriend and we leave. Later we hear that the dead guy was a waiter. He intervened in an argument a customer had with his gay friend. Told him to keep it down. Customer got up, pulled out a gun and shot the waiter in the head. I still sometimes think about how he lay there so still and peaceful. And it me realize how quick it can all end for you. Just like that. I was in middle school in USA. I bought nachos at the snack shack in front of school and waited for the bus. A guy walked up to a bald guy in a white shirt and black JanSport backpack and kept hitting him with a weird underhand swing. The white shirt guy turned to fight at the middle of the second swing. It was bloody. I was confused. The white shirt guy collapses and the other guy runs off. The guy on the ground kept taking struggled breaths while looking up at me. He died before the ambulance got there. I remember him looking so scared. Many years ago, I was at a pizza joint in Stockton, CA for a company party. It was one of those pizza places that has those long benches and tables so different groups wind up sitting pretty close to each other sometimes. If you are aware, Stockton is Northern California's version of South Central LA, so there must have been a few different gangs here at the time. It was a big place, and I think a Friday or Saturday evening. I don't know what was going on, but some gang melee broke out and a guy who was before this sitting peacefully directly across the table from me got his head cracked open with one of those super heavy glass mugs with the handle and heavy base. He went down in a big pool of blood. I wanted no part of this and I walked right to the front door, and in that time, cops were already running in. I found out a few days later he died in a hospital. This was not technically a murder, although I felt it should have been considered one. A drunk/drugged guy had been kicked out of a pub I was standing outside of. He tried to walk back in a couple of times but the security guard on the door pushed him back. On the third attempt the guard punched him, hard, in the face. The drunk stumbled back and fell to the footpath, the back of his head hit it first. He was either unconscious or dead at that moment. While the security guard stood and just smugly looked at the guy on the ground, no attempt to call for medical help or just check on the guy. His equally drunk/high girlfriend tried to wake him and pulled him up. I went to stop her, but she was off her face and gave me a whack as she pulled her boyfriend up while blood and brain poured out the back of his head. I went and grabbed a cop and gave a statement the next day, but no one seemed too interested in looking into the guard's excessive use of force. While driving for work, I went down a back road to reach a remote oilfield location. While driving in, I seen a vehicle parked on the side with a vehicle just pulling away. Didn't really think anything of it. After finishing my job and leaving, I seen the vehicle was still parked on the side and running, but no one was in the driver's seat. Thought it was kind of weird, and it was also -30 out that day, so I stopped to see what was up. Found the poor fella bound and gagged in the back seat with a gunshot wound to the head. Sitting in an ambulance drinking a peanut butter milkshake from a UDF. It's around 2 to 3 am and we've been up all night. On the sidewalk in front of us, two guys start to fight. One pulls out a gun and shoots the other point blank many times. He ran, we scooped the dude and drove fast. A couple of years ago, when I was still in college, I was coming back to my dorm room at night when I heard 2 to 3 loud pops and someone screaming in pain. I went up to my room and out the window saw a handful of cops blocking off the street around the corner from my building. Turns out the campus police received an anonymous tip that a man was armed outside the dorm down the street from mine. When they arrived, the man took out a knife and charged one of the officers. He ignored the officer's warnings, so the officer ended up shooting him. They took him to the hospital, but he died on the way there. It was later found out that the anonymous tip actually came from the man, who was actually a student. It was declared a suicide by police, I think that's what it's called, so technically not murder, but it led to some pretty terrible events in the week that followed, before the official report came out. My mom witnessed her boyfriend and boyfriend's brother get murdered. She tells me that all she remembers is being in the car with her BF's brother, lifeless body next to her, and her BF asking her if his brother was all right. She kept telling him he was safe. He later died in the hospital. Which story would you like to hear? I have several. My neighbor apparently was mixed up with the cartels. I grew up in NM. They evidently ran foul of them. One night 5 people surrounded their trailer and opened fire. This was about 3 a.m. I was sleeping. I rolled out of my bed and hit the floor. We were at a club for teenagers one night when I was 15. An acquaintance of mine was hitting on this girl in the parking lot. Said girl was the GF of a gangbanger. Said gangbanger pulled out a .25 and shot dude in the face for hitting on his GF. I was walking home from a movie one day. I hear a screech like tires skidding. I look over and there was a head-on collision. Dude flew through the windshield. Died instantly. The other driver was arrested and charged for driving drunk, causing a death. Sadly I have more, but I gotta go to work. While leaving a RZA concert in 2007, 2 drunk men accidentally bumped into each other and exchanged words, which quickly turned to blows and spilled into the street in front of the venue. One of the guys was trying to walk away from it with his hands up while the other was clearly the aggressor. Just as it looked like it was over, a Suburban pulled up and the aggressor walked over to the passenger side, opened up the door, grabbed a gun, and turned around and shot the guy who was walking away from point blank range at least 5 times, and then turned and started firing into the crowd as well. The dude was dead in the street. I don't remember ever hearing if they caught the guy, but I distinctly remember what he looked like. Crazy time. I was walking home from the Illiquor store just a block away from my apartment in LA. It was 10 p.m. as I pass a guy on the sidewalk. Another man about 20 feet away yells at him. I couldn't make out what he said. I remember thinking I don't want to get involved in that. Almost before the thought finishes, the second guy fires a gun at the first guy. I drop my chips and soda I bought, and without thinking or looking I run across the street. 4 shots went off in total. I know one of them was a me because when L saw the spark fly from it hitting the ground in front of my as I ran across the street. I saw the guy with the guy running parallel to me on the other side of the street, and suddenly it dawns on me I'll need to call 911. By the time I looks back at the street from my phone, the man was gone. The first guy died in the liquor store I was just at. I only went back once before I moved about 2 months later. I don't know how I didn't get shot and I don't know anything about what led up to it. I was the only witness and detectives told me that something like this was really uncommon of the neighborhood. Fireworks still scare me sometimes. I was going to school with my dad, our car drove by a store, and there was a little commotion in front of it. Turns out it was a mugging attempt. I more heard than saw it, but it really fucked me up. I was around 13 at the time. I got to school, sat down on the table, and started to shake. They called my dad a few minutes later to pick me up because I was clearly very shocked. Later it was on the news, and the guy had died immediately from the shot. A street camera captured the whole thing and you can see my dad's car pass by right when the guy gets shot. That was a weird week. Was playing a show back in 2013 in downtown San Jose, CA on a Friday night. Just finished my set and was outside smoking a cigarette with a friend. Looked down the street and saw two good-looking women with a guy standing on the corner waiting to cross the street. Some dude was jaywalking across a busy street which caught my eye, and as he approached the guy with the two girls, he just sucker punched the guy as hard as he could, which I heard from half a block away. Dude fell back and cracked his head on the curb. The girls start screaming and me and my buddy run over to see if we can help. Nope. This guy was convulsing and bleeding out his ears and chewing his tongue to shreds. The girls take their tops off to try to use as pillows/bandages, and a few moments later, dude stopped moving. All that was left was just a river of blood leaking out of his skull and ears. Cops showed up moments later, took vitals, and 5 minutes later the guy had a white sheet over him. Don't know if they caught the guy that hit him. It was this October in Quebec. I was outside and there was a lot of people, and a guy with a sword killed 3 person and 2 of them were in front of me. I was scared as shit and I didn't know my body could run that fast for so long. It was at a Red Hot Chili Peppers concert in Camden, New Jersey back in the early 2000s. Our high school friend group went down hours before the show to get drunk in the parking lots. The guy across the road from us was selling nitrous balloons out of his trunk. There is what is known as the Nitrous Mafia in Philadelphia, who basically run the nitrous balloon selling game at all major events. They came by and told this kid to shut his tank off and get off their turf. The kid basically told them to fuck off. About half an hour later they returned, walked up behind him and slit his throat. Our friend ran and flagged down a bike EMT and we all went into the show. On our way into the show, a group of much older, very drunk Delco trash jumped us and beat us up pretty good because they didn't like what we were wearing, I think. Fucking terrible day. Was vaulting, and across the street some guys jumped out of a car and started fight a dude. During the scuffle, dude was holding his own against the 3 guys, one of them pulled a gun and pop dude went down. Guys jumped back in the car and sped away. Dude's girlfriend who was with him screamed and draped herself over him. Found out later in the news the guys in the car catcalled the girlfriend. He said something back, they took offense and started the fight. He was an 18Y/O, IRC, kid. Just senseless. I just was in a shocked state the rest of the night. 2 doors down from the house I grew up in lived an older couple. Their son, 30-ish, came to house sit for a few days while they were on vacation. 2 robbers must have scouted the house and attempted to rob them the day after they left. Little did they know the couple's son was inside and armed. The son heard the break-in and ran downstairs to find the robbers who attempted to flee. He shot one of them a couple of times and the guy ended up dead in the driveway while the other got away. I can still remember the police holding us from leaving our house. Then when passing the neighbor's house to leave the man's body laying there. White wife beater covered in blood, pool of blood under his chest, eyes still open. TLDR, neighbor's son shot a robber dead in the driveway. Police left the body uncovered. I was with my cousin, his father, and my father. This was in 2010 Mexico. Mind you, my uncle and his soon-to-be ex-wife weren't getting along at all whatsoever. Anyways, it's a Sunday and it's getting late, so we get in the car to go drop off my cousin next town. Since my uncle wasn't getting along with his wife, we parked down the street at a corner store. So as my uncle is saying bye to his son, a guy in a hoodie, we didn't know this at the time but it was my aunt's brother, started chasing my uncle around the car with a knife. They made 3 laps around the car, and that's when my dad stepped out the vehicle with his 9mm Beretta and emptied his clip on the guy. My dad, being a hunter and army veteran, didn't miss a shot from his 14-round clip. Guy was dead before he hit the floor. My dad then fled the country only to be arrested and brought back. Yes, it was dumb for him to flee, but it was an unregistered firearm. Anyway, he did 2 years in prison for possession of an illegal firearm. This incident destroyed our family, but it's now been a decade and we've managed to get back on our feet. It's rare for me to hear from my father, but he gives me a call every now and then. I'm exposed to this stuff pretty regularly, not murders, but death period. But the ones that stick with me the most are the wrong way drivers. The most recent was on deck 27. This family was headed home. You can see where they tried to avoid each other because the driver's sides on both vehicles were totally destroyed. The family man saved his wife's life by doing that. Long story short, we had to cut both cars up to get them out. Family man died before we could get him out, but still had to perform life-saving measures since he was conscious when we got there. His 12-year-old daughter had a deep laceration down to her skull and is probably gonna lose her eye, and his wife had some type of head trauma. The drunk driver survived, of course, with a broken leg. I'm a little callous to shit like this by now, but the timing bothered me a lot. I just thought how just 2 days before they were celebrating Christmas and this fucking asshole ruined their lives forever. I forgot to mention that family man's son was in another vehicle behind them and saw the whole thing go down and saw us trying to get his parents and sister out. I felt for the kid seeing his dad in the condition he was in. Unfortunately, that wasn't my first or last time seeing this type of thing. I watched a girl I know stab another girl. The other girl had a knife too. Was surreal watching 2 people stand and stab each other. I called an ambulance. The girl I knew nearly died as the knife hit an artery. My neighbor was murdered 2 years ago next Wednesday at 4 a.m. I heard the whole thing happen through the wall and called 911. Side story: I was one of the 2 people who called, even though most people on the floor reported hearing it. The cops couldn't get in the building, so the dispatcher called me back and asked me to go let them in. At the time, I didn't know if the screaming had come from above or beside my apartment and just wanted the police in the building. My apartment was on the 1st floor, so I ran out my door towards the left to let them in the front door. I told them what I heard and said I didn't know where it was coming from, so they said they would look around. We turned the corner to get back on my hall and the murderer was trying to drag my neighbor's body out of the building. He was completely naked and had the knife in his hand. He very calmly and eerily just waved the police over and said, "Okay, come on in." Bonus trauma: I was in front of the police this whole time. I jumped into my apartment and was in total shock for a few hours. The police never checked on me and the detective made jokes about what happened. I still have night terrors and hallucinate that someone trying to murder me. My dad was murdered when I was a kid. We lived in a shitty part of Florida and he was very young, 26. People came into the apartment right after the babysitter walked in. He was going somewhere that night, and she was coming to watch my brother and me. My brain blocked most of it out, but I know they were there to rob my family. There was some altercation and a rapid fire of a handgun. I was in a back room, but my brother was right there and he suffers ear damage to this day. I've had lots of PTSD counseling, so I'm not as freaked out by it anymore. I've always wanted to make a podcast about it or something. I know which prison the gunman is at. I think it's an interesting story though, because the newspapers collated the case and accused random people and basically ruined any real justice that could have come from the situation. It was bizarre for my family. As a kid, I grew up working with my non-profit parents in a third world orphanage. I saw the director of the orphanage murder 15 babies. She was supposed to order enough beds, food, supplies, etc. from the government for all the babies, and there were about 30 to 35. Instead, she ordered enough for only 15 children, and pocketed the remaining money and let the other 15 die. I don't believe in God, but I believe in hell and that woman deserves its deepest realms. I didn't witness it, but my dad did when I was young, and I remember being haunted by his story about it over the dinner table. Basically, this teenage kid came running up to his truck and banging on the window asking my dad to let him into the car. My dad had no idea what was going on and didn't open the car, and seconds later the kid started to run away. A car came whipping around the corner and smacked right into the kid, killing him. The driver tried to say it was an accident, but given the speed he was driving in a residential area, and given what my dad saw, the guy was charged with murder. Was in 11th grade during open lunch. There was a small shopping complex with a donut shop and a liquor store right next to it. Saw a robbery gone bad and they shot the male 3 or 4 times. Saw him fall right in front of me and everyone ran. He was with his wife and a toddler. Still have flashbacks even though it was 10+ years ago of him just hitting the concrete pillar and falling. My wife and I were sitting in our living room one Saturday and we heard pop, pop, pop. I went outside to see what it was and the corner store lady laying on the sidewalk. I could see blood pooling around her. She died. The woman who shot her was arrested. Turns out the lady stole a pack of gum and the corner store lady followed her out of the store with a gun. Then a few years later, I was wakened by another set of pop, pop, pops. It was summer and the window were open. I heard the guy yelling, "You killed me." So fucked. I was at a mass shooting. The Aurora Theater shooting. T was not in a theater, nor shot at. I was working on the surrounding roads as an intern for a construction company. Once the shooting ensued, a handful of us chose to stay and aid. That night was a shit show. I saw a lot of very terrible things. People with bullet wounds you don't see in movies. I was given a life-saving award for helping in saving the life of a 17-year-old kid shot in the head. I stayed and aided the police for 7 hours. That event caused severe PTSD that influenced and altered my life. I have sought treatment and am much better now. I will do a live broadcast of the entire event and post it to my page because the whole story truly takes an hour to explain. To really go through everything saw that night. Tragically, I don't believe this qualifies as a murder, though I believe it should. Closest definition I could find was depraved heart manslaughter, but I could be wrong. The day before Halloween this year, I was at a red light at the crazy intersection in my neighborhood with one car in front of me. Our light turns green, so the car in front of me starts to slowly accelerate. Quicker than any of us could process, from our left, a mid-sized SUV-type vehicle comes barreling through his now red light at least 3 to 4 seconds after it had turned. He clipped and took off the front bumper of the girl's car in front of me, lost control of his car, and smashed directly into a grandmother waiting at a bus stop, killing her instantly. She'd just picked up a pizza for her family and was on her way home. The man's car tipped onto his driver's side, so I'm not sure how he got out as quickly as he did, but he had the gall to start yelling at the girl whose bumper he took off, asserting it was her fault for being in the intersection during our green light. This was after she'd literally spilled out of her car door wailing, "Think Hereditary." She couldn't believe she'd been a part of it. I was the first one to call 911, and the operator asked if anyone could perform CPR. I remember telling her that there wasn't anything left of her to perform CPR on. To my knowledge, the police deemed it an accident and nothing happened to the man. As one bystander said to me, "We just witnessed that man make the worst mistake of his life." We did, and I hope it never, ever leaves him. Earwitness to my brother's murder and eyewitness to the perpetrator escaping. Identified his body at the scene. It was 30 years ago. I had a whole post typed up about what had happened. Booty, don't want anyone who might read it and know us to identify me. He was just with his girlfriend to look at some puppies when a jealous ex-husband decided to take matters into his own hands and kill every man at the house and his ex. He shot 4 people but only killed one, the only man there who had never met his ex-wife before that night, my brother. Third, it all happened, and identified him at the scene. I can live with all of that. The one thing I still can't live with is how horribly I handled telling my mom when I had to call them home. Should have told my dad instead so he could handle it in person. That wail she let was worse than hearing the people shut call out for help through all of their pain. I was about 12 when this happened. I remember sitting on my back porch with my family while we had a fire or something going. Our family heard a commotion at our neighbor's house that was behind our backyard. We could hear yelling and screaming and things being broken. We thought for sure it was a robbery. But we didn't go inside or called 911 until we heard a final scream, then about 5 gunshots. We all ran inside without saying a word and called 911. It turns out a woman was murdered by her ex and he did it out of rage or whatever, and at the time that woman was married, but her husband was at work or out of town. It was the talk of our little town, and I actually don't know if they found the guy. I just remember that surreal night. Anyway, thanks for reading. My friend comes to visit from Florida for one night. We're at an after-hours club and I have a fake ID but he's of age. We're outside smoking. Some dude pulls up in a white car and walks over screaming with a gun to the bouncer. The bouncer pulls out his own gun and shot him 6 times. Turns out, bouncer was sleeping with the guy's wife. Guy fell on the hood of his white car, covering it in blood, and died. Cops showed up. Girl we were talking to outside has a big mouth and is telling the cops that her and I saw everything, and the bouncer wasn't the shooter, it was a drive-by. She was drunk and wrong. Cops grabbed me, her, and my Florida friend as witnesses to an alleged, but false, drive-by and brought us downtown. I filled out all the paperwork under my fake ID, eventually came clean and admitted I was underage and that the ID was fake once he started questioning its validity. Cop was pissed but let it ride. We had to stay downtown for 11 hours throughout this whole process of basically saying no, this girl's wasted, it was the bouncer, as they already knew. They gave us cheese sandwiches and let us smoke cigarettes in the station, but overall it was an absolutely drunken, terrible, and sleepless night. The friend I was with visiting from Florida never came back to visit. The bank I work at is across the street from a pawn shop. One day, there was an argument in there and a man came out with the owner and shot him in the back of the head. My boss shut and locked all the doors and closed the metal shutters. Our armed guards had their weapons ready until the cops showed up, a gunfight ensued, and the man was shot dead. Can't say my first week at work was boring. At dinner that night, my husband asked how work went that day. I told him and started shaking. He then said that made the mouse that ran across the floor in his office seem minor. I think he was disappointed because he had a funny story about a mouse at work to tell and I ruined it by saying I saw a man shot and a police gunfight on the street at work. Not much to say, but I was walking from school and I lived in a bad neighborhood at the time, so I would pass this street called Pleasant, ironic isn't it, and there was a gang there who always had shit going on with other PPL, so one day I walked by and heard faint shouting, then 3 shots fired. I said fuck all that and ran home imau. The next day I found out the kid who was shot went to my school. I was 6 to 7 years old playing with my sister in our backyard. We heard something and thought it was just a firecracker since firecrackers are normal in our country. Then we heard screaming and out of nowhere, a man was running in our backyard. He stopped for a moment, looked at us then jumped off the fence. We went to the front yard to see what was going on and saw our neighbor being carried to a car, to be taken to the hospital. We couldn't understand what was happening until my mother ushered us inside and said our neighbor was shot. After a few days some witnesses said the guy who shot him ran into our yard and that's the only time we realized the guy we saw was the murderer. Police never asked us about anything. TBH, I couldn't remember his face. It happened so fast. All I could remember was the screams I heard. Halloween I was trick-or-treating with family. We were at a trailer park and had gone up to a trailer and guy came out and pointed a gun at the kids, later turned out to be a pellet gun. My tather was carrying a gun and shot and killed him. I remember being grabbed and running from the scene and the horrible silence at home. The guy who died apparently had been with a prostitute who robbed him after he died, so they thought it was a murder robbery. My father turned himself in and charges were eventually dropped. At my old apartment, my neighbors often had the police called for domestic violence. One day I was sitting outside smoking when I saw the woman come out of the house. It looked like she was sneaking. All of a sudden I heard the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. T watched her boyfriend drag her into the house by her hair. I immediately called the police. I waited and waited, they never showed. I guess they bumped it to the bottom of the list given the couple's history of violence. I wish they would have showed, because a few days later her body washed up in a nearby body of water. I wish someone, myself included, could have done more. In 2014 or 2015 saw 2 men savagely beat another with metal baseball bats. It was at a state prison and when the EMTs arrived they wouldn't touch the body. It was too late. They brought out biohazard crew to clean up the gray matter from the floor. I had to wait with the corpse the rest of my shift in our receiving and discharge area. He had to remain cuffed until pronounced dead by the coroner. I watched my best friend die in front of me. We were at a party and some guys started shit and my friend tried to intervene. One of the guys pulled out a small pocket knife and stabbed him in the chest. Hit the corner of his heart. He died on scene. I watched him die. I'll never forget the look in his face when he was on the ground. Eyes rolled back. The small trickle of blood coming from his chest. I watched him die. Unfortunately been 24 years and still can picture right like yesterday. He was a great man and would have been a great American. I think about him every day. Love each other. That's all I can say. This stupid shot isn't worth lives. Love each other. Eastern Europe, 2004. Was very young and it was New Year's Day, right after the ball dropped. I was walking home and I saw two Runka threaten a man for his wallet across the street. He didn't give it up and they started jumping him. They beat him very badly and he ended up daylying. The only reason I know it is because it was in the newspaper the next day. That's about it.